Have you ever wondered if a country's shape on a map could actually shape its soul? Well, today we're diving into the story of Chile, where the wild, extreme geography isn't just a pretty backdrop, it's a main character. So let's get into it and see how this incredible land forged a nation.
I mean, just look at it. Chile is this impossibly long, skinny ribbon of land. It's literally squeezed between the biggest ocean in the world, the Pacific, and this massive, towering wall of mountains, the Andes. And this unique shape, well, it's created a country of incredible contrasts. Not just in the scenery, but, as we're about to see, in its entire history.
You know, traveling the length of Chile is like visiting four completely different planets. You can start up north in the Atacama Desert, and I'm not kidding, it looks like photos from Mars. Then you hit the center, this beautiful, fertile valley where most people live. Head further south, and you're suddenly in a world of ancient, misty forests and volcanoes. And then you get to the very bottom, the end of the world, the wild, icy fjords of Patagonia. But this land of extremes isn't just a geography lesson. It's really the stage for an epic human story. And here's the thing, long before any Europeans ever showed up, all kinds of different peoples had already figured out how to not just survive, but thrive in these incredibly tough environments. The ingenuity was just amazing. You had the Amara carving farms into the high desert, the Coescar expertly navigating those icy southern waters in canoes. But there's one group we really need to focus on, the Mapuche, whose name means the people of the earth. Their fierce, unflinching independence would end up defining Chile for centuries. And then, in the 16th century, everything changes. The Spanish conquistadors arrive, and they're thinking, hey, this will be a piece of cake, just like Mexico and Peru. Yeah, they were in for a very rude awakening. What the Spanish ran into was the Arauco War. And this wasn't some short-lived rebellion. We are talking about a brutal, grinding conflict that lasted for 300 years. The Mapuche didn't just resist, they were brilliant adapters. They became master horsemen, taking the Spaniards' own greatest weapon and turning it against them in a relentless guerrilla war. So what happened? It was basically a stalemate. The Biobío River stopped being just a river. It became a hard frontier, a real line in the sand. South of that line, the Mapuche nation remained free, unconquered. And this idea of a frontier nation, a deep division, gets baked right into the Chilean identity. You can still feel it today. Okay, so how do we get to the modern nation of Chile? Well, after Santiago was founded, there's independence from Spain in the early 1800s. But the real game changer came late in the century, with the War of the Pacific. Chile fought Peru and Bolivia for control of the Atacama Desert. Why? Because it was full of nitrate, a hugely valuable mineral. Chile won the war, got incredibly rich, and all that new money just sparked a whole new set of bitter arguments. And that brings us to the 20th century and what you could call the Great Chilean Argument. The focus shifts from nitrate to something even more valuable, copper, and with it came the one single question that would define modern Chile. And this was the question at the heart of everything. Should all the money from the country's massive copper reserves go to foreign corporations, or should it belong to the Chilean people themselves? This was never just about economics. It was a deep, passionate battle for the nation's very soul. In 1970, this whole argument just boiled over. A doctor and socialist named Salvador Allende actually wins the presidential election, and he proposed something really unique for the time, a peaceful, democratic road to socialism. No violent revolution. He wanted to use the country's own laws to create a more equal society. Now, for millions of poor and working-class Chileans, this was a moment of just incredible hope. The copper industry was nationalized, land was being redistributed to poor farmers, but for the wealthy elite and the middle classes, it was an absolute disaster. They saw their property being seized, the economy was spiraling out of control, and yet the U.S. was secretly working to destabilize the country. Society was just torn in two. There was no middle ground left. The whole experiment came to an incredibly violent end. As the presidential palace was literally being bombed by the military, Allende got on the radio and gave one last, defiant address, telling the nation he would not surrender. His final words became a symbol of resistance for generations. And then, silence. On September 11, 1973, a military coup led by General Augusto Pinochet ended Chile's democratic experiment in fire and blood. For the next 17 years, Chile lived this very strange double life. On the one hand, you had brutal political repression. Congress was shut down, political parties were banned, and thousands of people were tortured or simply disappeared by the secret police. But on the other hand, a radical economic revolution was happening, led by a group of economists known as the Chicago Boys. They installed a pure free market system, completely dismantling the old economy. But the way the dictatorship ended is just an incredible story. In 1988, Pinochet, feeling totally secure in his power, calls a simple yes or no vote on whether he should stay in charge. The opposition, after years of being silenced, bravely united behind a no campaign, using a rainbow as their symbol of hope for a different future. And in a result that stunned the world, the people voted no. They voted him out. It was a victory of pencils over guns. And in 1990, democracy returned to Chile. The return to democracy kicked off what many called the Latin American miracle. Chile became the region's success story, stable, prosperous, modern. But that miracle came with a very high price that was hidden just beneath the surface. Because while things looked good on paper, deep frustrations were simmering. The gap between the very rich and everyone else was just enormous. The cost of going to college or even just seeing a doctor was crushingly high for most families. The privatized pension system was failing, leaving many elderly people in poverty. There was just this growing feeling that the whole system, it was rigged. And in October of 2019, the spark that lit the whole thing on fire was almost comically small. A hike in the subway fare of just 30 pesos. That's about 4 US cents. But that tiny spark triggered the largest social protests in the country's entire history. And the chant that echoed through the streets told you everything you needed to know about what was really going on. It's not about 30 pesos, it's about 30 years. This was a massive cry against 3 decades of pent-up frustration over inequality. It was a demand for dignity and for a fairer country. That social explosion has pushed Chile into a whole new period of intense, soul-searching debate. Once again, the country is grappling with its core identity and trying to figure out where to go from here. You know, when you step back, you can really see modern Chilean history in 3 dramatic acts. First, you had Allende's project for radical equality, which ended in chaos. Then, Pinochet's authoritarian free market project, which generated wealth but crushed human rights. And finally, the 30-year democratic project, which tried to find a balance, but in the end left far too many people feeling the system was still unfair. And today, that great Chilean argument is still raging. They're debating a brand new constitution to finally replace the one left over from the dictatorship. They're arguing over who should profit from new resources like lithium, the white gold of the 21st century, and they're still wrestling with those same old, deep questions of justice and inequality. Which brings us right back to the land itself. Chile is a land of earthquakes. It's a constant, powerful reminder that for anything to last, it needs to be strong, yes, but it also has to be flexible enough to bend without breaking. And maybe that's the central challenge for Chile today. How do you build a society that's strong enough to endure, yet flexible enough to truly make room for everyone?